Kamala Harris didn't lose because of low voter turnout. I know that might seem counterintuitive, but let me explain. Here are two separate maps of the 2024 presidential election. The first one shows a change in voter turnout for Donald Trump since 2020, relative to the voter-eligible population. Meaning, if we adjust for how many people are actually able to vote in each state, did Donald Trump receive more or fewer votes than he did in 2020? When you look at this map, you see that he very decisively ran the board across the entire country, the entire eastern seaboard, much of the Midwest, and the Southwest. In total, there are 30 states, plus DC, where Donald Trump received more votes than he did in 2020. And again, this is adjusting for any changes in population. This is pretty remarkable considering how high turnout was in 2020 already. This is clearly not a situation where Donald Trump just happened to win because people sat out this election, but rather Donald Trump winning precisely because they didn't. Now, this second one is an identical map, but for Kamala Harris. And you'll notice it does look a lot worse. There's actually only one state where she outperforms Joe Biden, and that's Wisconsin. Now, no, that's not a nothing state, but given everywhere else, most people would probably look at this and still conclude that she lost, maybe not because of low voter turnout overall, but at the very least because of low voter turnout for Democrats specifically. But I would argue against that. In fact, I think using this map like this is a little unfair. People forget we're comparing it to the election with the highest voter turnout in living memory. So not beating Joe Biden's record-breaking numbers doesn't necessarily mean she performed poorly. This map here shows every single state where 2020 had the highest voter turnout ever, even when we include this last election. It's a map that includes 32 states that span every single region of the country. 2020 was clearly a very special election, but you'll notice there are 5 states that are conspicuously missing from this map. Namely, these 5: Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. All 5 of these states had the highest voter turnout ever in this last election. When you look at them a little bit more closely, you can see that Kamala Harris absolutely did not lose because of low voter turnout. Let's take Pennsylvania first. Here, I've ranked all 14 presidential candidates since the year 2000 based off of what percentage of the voting eligible population turned out to vote for them. Meaning, if there are 10 million people that theoretically could have voted in a state, and 4 million of them voted for one candidate, that candidate would have received 40% of the voting eligible population. Based on this metric, Kamala Harris ranks 4th out of these 14, a lot higher than you'd expect for a losing candidate. The only candidates that received a higher percentage of the VEP are once-in-a-generation candidate 2008 Barack Obama, record-breaking 2020 Joe Biden, and the candidate she just lost to. She outperforms everyone else, including 4 people that actually won the state. No, this isn't record-breaking, but if she's performing poorly, she's performing poorly very well. Trump just objectively got the highest voter turnout in the state ever. And to say that this is only because of Kamala Harris's poor performance seems wrong as well. You'll notice that she got nearly the exact same percentage of the VEP as 2008 Barack Obama did. It's a difference of only 1/10 of 1%. So if they got nearly the same percentage of the state itself, how did Barack Obama win the state by 10 points? Well, it's because John McCain only received 28% of the voting eligible population. Donald Trump, he received 36. He won not because Kamala Harris had a particularly poor performance, but because he managed to summon an additional 8% of the state that sat out the 2008 election. See a very similar story in Nevada, where again, Kamala Harris places 4th, behind 2008 Barack Obama, 2020 Joe Biden, and 2024 Donald Trump. And again, she got nearly the exact same percentage of the VEP as 2008 Barack Obama did, differing by only 1/4%. Sure, she underperformed Joe Biden by 0.92%. But that didn't really matter, because Donald Trump outperformed his 2020 self by 2.65%. Michigan is the first state where Donald Trump doesn't beat Barack Obama's 2008 numbers, but Kamala Harris still places 4th, beating out every other loser and 4 winners of the state. In Wisconsin, like I mentioned earlier, Kamala Harris actually outperforms Joe Biden, but still lost. In Georgia, Kamala Harris places 4th, beating nearly every other Republican to have won the state since the year 2000. Sure, she underperformed Joe Biden by 0.19%, but again, that wouldn't have mattered because Donald Trump outperformed himself by 1.46%. These differences are too large to account for if you assume it's only because of Kamala Harris losing voters. And in North Carolina, not only does she outperform Mitt Romney, who flipped the state back from Barack Obama, but she also beats 2008 Barack Obama's numbers. If we're going to say that Kamala Harris lost because of low voter turnout, then we need to acknowledge that's only because Donald Trump has fundamentally changed the game. Now, if you look nationwide, you'll absolutely start to see low voter turnout for Kamala Harris. In terms of turnout, for the last 14 presidential candidates, Donald Trump doesn't place in the bottom 3 for a single state, whereas Kamala Harris places in the bottom 3 candidates for 16 states. Kamala Harris doesn't break turnout records for a single candidate in any state, whereas Donald Trump had the highest share of the voter-eligible population in 11 different states. Trump had the best performance of any Republican in New York, Rhode Island, Virginia, Maine, and New Hampshire, and the second best in California, Illinois, Delaware, and Connecticut. All states where Kamala Harris's performance varied widely. So I'm not denying that Kamala Harris performed poorly nationally, but I am denying that that's why she lost. Because of the way that we conduct elections, the way she performed in the other 43 states doesn't matter. And where it mattered most, people were absolutely turning out to vote for her. Now I was curious, so using the share of the VEP that voted for each candidate, I made mock matchups between candidates across different elections. I.e., since Trump won 36% of the VEP in Florida in 2020, but Barack Obama in 2008 won 33.75%, had 2008 Barack Obama been a candidate in 2020, Donald Trump would have still won Florida. Do this across all 50 states, and you'll notice that turnout for Kamala Harris was high enough for her to beat out every single Republican candidate since the year 2000, with the one exception of the one she just lost to. Now, I should say that this doesn't take into account any changes in partisan leanings for each of these states. For example, Barack Obama received 29% of the voter-eligible population in Georgia in 2008, but this was at a time when the state was much more conservative overall. So it's reasonable to consider that 2008 Barack Obama might have won Georgia in 2020 had he been a candidate due to changes in voter demographics. Unfortunately, I don't really have a way to accurately account for that right now, but it is something that's important to consider when you're looking at this, and not necessarily freak out and say, oh my god, even 2008 Barack Obama would lose to Trump. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think that this shows that Kamala Harris was a perfect candidate who did absolutely nothing wrong and only lost because she was going against supreme, almighty, unbeatable Donald Trump. If anything, I think the fact that the only places she performed well were swing states kind of indicates that quite a lot of her voters were just voting against Donald Trump. And so Democrats were much less likely to vote in states where they knew their vote did not matter. Which wasn't the case for a candidate like 2008 Obama, who saw increases in turnout virtually everywhere. But I do think there is a clear takeaway here, namely that turnout isn't enough anymore. Democrats can no longer rely on just increasing turnout to win elections. The turnout is already here. Unless Democrats manage to completely change what the words likely voters mean, like Donald Trump did, and reach parts of the electorate that have never voted before, they'll need to start convincing people who are already turning out to vote for them instead. And that's something that this presidential campaign was decidedly bad at doing.